This cinematic is created with the replay of a co-op skirmish match on Man of War Assault Squad 2 on the Looping Reel Gaming channel. If you would like to see the actual co-op Let's Play footage and want to see more Man of War cinematics on the Konoha channel, then please support us on the Looping Reel Gaming channel by subscribing and sharing our Man of War videos. The link to the gaming channel can be found in the description down below. We have several Man of War skirmishes already up, and also will do multiple mods and requests for missions. Enjoy! In 7076, the Continental Navy and Marines besieged the British port of Nassau in the Bahamas. It was one of the first engagements between the two factions and would end up being a very bloody conflict. The alarm bells were sounded long before, as silhouettes of ships could be seen on the horizon. The larger vessels stayed out of the range of the port's cannons as men were being loaded into the smaller boats to make ready for the initial assault. They would provide covering fire and artillery barrages whenever necessary. The initial assault would take place at a small island in front where the Redcoats had stationed a few hundred men alongside some cannons hidden in the shrubbery. Naval invasions back then were not the most efficient. It would take a long time for a boat to reach the shore, making them easy targets for the defending side. As soon as they would hit the shallow waters, they would disembark and try their best to keep their muskets dry. They would then find themselves in the open beach with the ability to take one shot at the enemy. Then, the reload would follow, in an environment with barely any cover. As they got off their boats, they immediately got fired upon. The artillery barrage by some of their ships that happened moments earlier thinned out the enemy group a bit and took out some valuable cannons. It at least gave the Continental forces the chances to run for cover and reload. They were spread out over the beachhead, firing whenever they could on the enemy. The British found themselves wavering not too long into this fight. Many feared another artillery bombardment or reinforcing troops on the enemy side. Some were already falling back to the other side of the island. Their line was broken, greatly reducing the effectiveness of their firing volleys. This gave their enemy the chance to move up to the beach and hopefully reach their line soon. The former British defensive positions were sprawled with body parts, blood, and corpses. They used to say that they wore red uniforms to hide the blood when shot, but this did nothing for being hit by artillery as one got shelled to pieces. The Brits who fled deeper into the jungle were now not at a position where they could fire at the enemy. None dared to go back to a position where they could, as more decided to flee. Their left flank still held, as the British had a clear vision. It was here where the Continental forces suffered losses, but they did put the pressure on the Redcoats, as this side was wavering too. Finally, the initial defensive positions had been taken by the Americans, and their spirits were high, as the adrenaline led them into the jungle to finish the job on the fleeing men in front of their eyes. The remaining British suffered a sad fate. Their fellow army and safety could be seen on the other side, but they had no way to reach it. They stood half soaked in the water as they fired desperately at an approaching army. There were a few who tried to find some small boats that were still seaworthy, but there simply was no time. From the vegetation, the Americans emerged, and they were relentless and were sure of one thing. On this island, not one British would be spared. With this island now being captured, the actual assault and raid on the port would start. The port was fortified, and its fortress held hundreds of troops and many cannons capable of doing devastating damage on the entire beachhead in front and surrounding it. They had more troops stationed along the shore on each side and deeper within the jungle. It was here where the blood would truly flow. During the next hours, more troops would be moved to the island, as this would be their place of departure and reinforcements. Their navy fleet drew closer to get in reach of performing artillery bombardments on the fort itself and troops on the beaches. Soldiers were worried about the enemy's fortified position. There were so many redcoats and the cannons were perfectly positioned. As the first boats with troops landed at the beaches, the order was given for an artillery barrage to cover those troops, but also to take out their cannons. Many hits missed their targets, while others were more effective. The grand display worked up morale for the attacking forces. Though the cannons on the walls were easier targets, the individual soldiers were difficult to pinpoint. If one got shot, they were immediately replaced by another to ensure that the fort at least had infantry cover at all sides. The battle itself to get into this fort would be bloody and chaotic, and a dilemma entirely on its own. But for the Continental Army, this was not the pressing issue just yet. Deeper into the jungle, artillery had decimated the second British defensive line, signaling for the troops to move from the beach into the vegetation. As this was happening, a third wave of reinforcements arrived to secure the beachhead for any final waves incoming. Battles would now slow down as the terrain would be more difficult to traverse and both sides would profit from cover by the lush vegetation provided. But though the troops on the left could start traversing into the jungle, the men on the right were still intermingled in heavy fighting on the beach alone. They were still not able to move up. as both first waves of soldiers took heavy losses. Their artillery dealt devastating damage to the British, even as far as their outer exterior all the way back at the fort. Huge explosions of ammunition and gunpowder kegs could be seen all the way from the shore. The battle was far from over. The Continental Marines would still have to traverse the jungle, only to regroup once again to pull off their final charge on the fort through the main entrance. This would prove to be a bottleneck where size and numbers would not matter. Battling would still last the entire day, and a lot more soldiers would need to die before this conflict could be laid to rest.